is Howie Weiner, and I'll be giving this little talk about serious adverse events. I'm not Kaylee, who's back at home. And so before, there's a lot of slides to go through, so I'm going to go rather quickly.
Just keep talking. Keep talking, Howie.
And and there's a lot of information to go through. And so I want to try to get through them quickly to so there's a chance to answer questions. Before I begin, I just want to thank everyone. I want to thank Jill and the whole committee. And this has been a really fabulous conference. And I hope people have enjoyed it and learned something. So the question is, why do we file SAEs? Why do we bother at all? And the answer to that question is not just because it's the rules, but more importantly, because any clinical trial or any treatment for cancer is always going to have some toxicity to it. There's always going to be some events that we would rather not have. And there are certain events that are more important or more serious, and especially events that are unexpected, that we don't really know were going to happen. And what we want to do is give opportunity for the people running the study chair, the NCI, and the FDA, or a heads up as to what's going on in real time, so that if there is too much toxicity, or if there's certain toxicities like liver, cardiac, neurologic, that are very serious, we can put the trial on hold. We can try to deal with the issue and then move on from there. So the, excuse me, the outlook is to be as safe for patients as possible. Okay, so we'll start off by all this technical stuff. So this is the only way I could do it, by tapping this. Okay, so what is a serious adverse event? I'm not going to read through all of these. Most of you are probably familiar with it, and they are contained in every protocol, this common list of adverse events. Just one thing I'll say is that an adverse event, usually we think of as when someone is hospitalized. You don't necessarily have to be hospitalized to have an adverse event, and some hospitalizations are not adverse events. SAEs are graded in this little book called the CTCAE. I would suggest, if you don't have an app on your phone, there's really good apps that can guide you to it. It's a complicated document, and using it electronically makes it much easier to search for terms. This is just sort of a repetition of the previous slide. SAEs are defined in the protocol, and they follow different reporting requirements, which is the purpose of this talk. SAE reporting. When we talk about routine, we're talking about just the common adverse event that we just enter into our database, and then eventually somebody looks at it, and it takes time, and it goes into the analysis. SAEs stand out. They're in a class by themselves, and they need to be expedited. And there are basically in Alliance protocols two types: one that have to be reported within 24 hours and completed within 5 days, and another that's a little less serious that have to be reported in 10 calendar days. This slide will show you a table that's present in every Alliance protocol that I know about, and it gives the criteria for reporting of SAEs. So if you look at it, it's very easy. In this particular table, if you're hospitalized, for more than 24 hours and it's a grade 1, 2, or 3 adverse event, then you have 10 calendar days to report it. If it's no hospitalization, it's grade 1 or 2, you're not required to report it. And for all grade 4 and deaths, grade 5, you have 24 hours to report the event and 5 days to complete it. Every protocol is a little different and this table will be different. So it's important to look it over. Then SAE reporting can also go on after treatment stops. And each protocol will have a guidance as to that. Most protocols, you have to report SAEs for 30 days past the period of treatment. But as the slide indicates, if an adverse event occurs later than that period, but is thought related to the treatment, then you still have to report it if it meets the criteria. In this case, they're talking about grade 4 and 5 SAEs. And then there's a separate section about radiation, those little drugs that have radioactivity, and it gives some guidance as to the period when you need to report those events. Then there's a thing, we have a lot of acronyms in our clinical trials, and there's a thing called a CAPER, Comprehensive Adverse Events and Potential Risk List. And that's basically most of these drugs that we've used, they've been used before, whether they're experimental or they're standard of care drugs. And over a period of time, there's been a list compiled of what we expect the adverse events to be. And one nice feature of Alliance protocols is that we present this list so that people could be familiar with it and know what to do about them. So here's an example of a CAPER. It'll be in your protocol, whatever protocol you're going to use, and it's divided up. You'll see like the more likely, less likely, rare events. So in this particular protocol, for example, diarrhea is likely in greater than 20% of the patients. So if your patient is experiencing diarrhea and on this clinical trial, it's an expected event. We also have a thing called a SPEAR. So we have another acronym, and it's the Specific Protocol Exceptions to Expedited Reporting. And the reason for this, and it's actually a nice feature in Alliance trials, is that some events are so expected, they happen so frequently that if they are within the limits presented in this, which I'll show you in the next slide, then we don't have to report them at all as SAEs. As I said before, the purpose of reporting SAEs is to see events that really stand out. And we don't want to cover that up by inundating the NCI, inundating the study chair with all sorts of events that we know are going to happen. So for example, in this protocol, you have next to the CAPER, you have a list of exceptions. So if your patient is suffering constipation or diarrhea, as the slide points out, and it's deemed a grade 2 or a grade 3 or less, then you will just report that as a routine adverse event. You do not have to report it as a serious adverse event because they know it's going to happen and it's expected to happen. So it allows you a little leeway on it. It's also another nice feature about SAEs. So now we come to this thing and we're asking people to answer this question. What do you do if you hear one of your study patients has been admitted to the hospital? Look in the protocol to see if it requires expedited reporting. Do nothing. It will get reported when data is reported. Determine how long the patient was hospitalized for, or A or C. So I guess people can scan their devices and give an answer. And just let me know when I go to the next slide. I will give it like a little bit of time. This is actually the first thing that you do when an event occurs, and to figure out if you have to report it in an expedited manner. That's the most important step. All right, so we'll go ahead, and we did pretty good in that. A and C is the correct answer, I believe, but and 89% of the people agreed with that. So we're doing good. And here's another question. Where do you look in the protocol to determine if the admission requires an SAE report? A, the expedited adverse event reporting section, the CAPER section, the dose modification section, or the treatment section. So we'll give you a little time to put your answers in. So we had enough time. So we'll see. Okay, very good. That's exactly where we look, as this one of the previous slides indicated. We look in the expedited adverse event reporting section. Is very, very clear what needs to be reported and what doesn't. So now that you've determined you have an adverse event, the patient was hospitalized, maybe with an infection, with diarrhea, with whatever, the hundreds of different things that happen to our patients. What do you do now? You know you have to file a report. And this basically gives you a summary of what to do. One is you want to answer the question, was a hospitalization greater than 24 hours? And that's a funny question, actually, because for a very serious event, you have to report it within 24 hours. So, but we know when a patient is admitted for a very serious matter, they're going to be there for a while. And the thing that I do is I will get in contact with the treating physician or the PI and ask them 3 questions. One, what is the term of the event? What are you calling this event? Sometimes it's not clear. What is the grade of the event so that we can refer back to the expedited reporting section? And 2, what was the event related to any of the study drugs or any of the CONMEDs that we gave to the patient or to anything else? What do they think it was related to? And sometimes that's not a clear answer. For example, I just had a patient on a trial who was going into her camper and she slipped and broke her ankle. That seems obviously, we had to file a SAE, the patient was hospitalized. It seems obviously not related, but maybe not. Maybe the patient, the study drug made the patient dizzy and they fell. So these things need to be investigated. This will give you, the slide is a really nice slide. It gives you what you need to gather for reporting. And it's really nice before you actually go in and report it to have as much of this information put together as possible. So you need the hospital reports, you need the protocol, you need your CTCAE guiding tool, grading tool, consent or IB. It's good for the PI to see what is expected treatment so that they could determine the attribution of the event. And then you need information about the patient, where they're at in their treatment, and just sort of general information about the patient that's going to be needed when you present your report. Now, the Alliance over the last few years has started a whole new system of integrated reporting. What does that mean? That means that instead of going into the CTEP AERS system where adverse events are reported, now we first go into the RAVE database and enter the event there, and the RAVE database analyzes the event, and if it says that you need to report it in the CTEP air system that we'll be looking at in a minute, it will automatically link you to it. So it won't allow you to enter an adverse event directly into the system, the serious adverse event reporting system, first into RAVE. And the way to determine whether your protocol has that feature or not is to just look up the protocol on the CTSU website, and you'll come to a page like this. And as the arrow shows you, it'll say an SAE integration. In this case, it says no. Some of our older protocols do not have that integration feature. And on this slide, the newest studies, it'll tell you, it has that little check mark. That means that you have to go into the RAVE system. So what does that mean? Let's say your protocol does have integrated reporting. So you go into your RAVE system and you enter an adverse event like you would enter any adverse event, putting all the information down, and you'll check the little box where it asks you, is this an SAE? That prompts the system to take you to another page, which is called the Expedited Reporting Evaluation page. And this page, RAVE is set up to evaluate the report and to let you know that whether it needs to be reported to the NCI system. So in this case, if it does, there's a little link. And if you press that link, you're taken directly to the CTEP Airs tab. And that this is the system where actually SAE reporting is done. Over the next number of slides, we're going to go over all the steps involved in it. It's a little bit intimidating, especially when you do it for the first few times, because it's the government and they don't make things as easy as possible. And, you know, you have a time limit. I remember I once went in, we had an adverse event occurred on a Friday night, and technically we could file it the next business day, but I didn't really want to do that. It was a really, really serious event. So I went in and it's Saturday, and it wasn't easy. I made a lot of mistakes going through this thing, and it has a lot of hard stops. If you don't fill it out exactly right, it won't let you submit the report. It's not like an old paper report from a pharmaceutical study or even the old CALGB. You have to get it right, and you have that time pressure on you. So anyway, you'll get to a page like this, and you'll be able, if you look at the slide, there's a little tab at the top says report adverse events. You just click on that and it'll initiate a new report. And it already knows you came from the RAVE system, that this is where you're supposed to be. And the next slides, we're just going to go through various pages in the adverse events expedited reporting system, just to give you an idea of what to do. This might seem like dry material, but it's important to have that information. This first page is just giving general information. You're going to pick the study, the subject ID, confirm the ID, your institution, and then that little button where it says add, you're going to press that, and it's going to ask you where the patient is at in the study. Are they in the intervention part? What cycle they're in? There'll be a whole other page that comes up. And so you'll get this information. One thing about entering information in this, and those little pink boxes, is that once you start entering it, you'll get a drop down once it figures out what you're trying to enter, and you have to click on that drop down. It won't let you just enter it straight through. That sort of confirms for itself that that's what you want to enter. Then it'll take you to another page where you're going to enter the adverse event. On this page, You can enter the event, you can call it, it doesn't have to be a CTCAE term. It can be, if you know what it is, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It's just exactly what the clinician calls the event. And so you enter that, and in this case, they're using diarrhea, which is very common, and it's certainly present in the CTCAE handbook. And so once you do that, you enter it, and then it will ask you another question. Then you have to enter the CTCAE term. It won't accept anything else. And sometimes that's a bit of a journey. So some events are not that common, or the way they're described in the CTCAE are not exactly what we think of. And so, for example, if a patient has an infection, there's a whole volume in that guide of different types of infections and what part of the body they're from. And you sort of have to search around and become familiar with them. If the patient has thrombocytopenia, their platelets are low. I think the term in the handbook is decreased platelets. So you have to enter it exactly like that. And so it's good to have that little guide with you on your phone, or if you have a hard copy of it. And I think this even gives you a link to it, but it's really better to have your own. Once you get the right term, it'll ask you for the grade. And that's why it's good to talk to the physician. I mean, you could enter whatever you want, really, but it's not really our job to determine the grade of that. So it's good to discuss this with the treating physician or PI. Then you'll move on to this last tab in the initial part of the report, and where you're going to review it, and it gives you all the information about the subject to study. It just repeats that. And the system has analyzed the event, and it'll make a recommendation. In this case, you'll see a big green check mark. It'll mean, yes, we want you to file a report. We are recommending that you do it. Recommendation is not exactly the right word. We're required to do that. So they're just trying to be nice about it. So once you see this, you'll move on. There'll be a place to just sort of move on from here. And it'll come to another page, which is a little different feature. Just sometimes they say no action is recommended, but you want to file the report because your physician, the clinician, thinks that this is an important event. It may, for example, an event that's just a grade 1 event, you could be hospitalized for, or maybe not, but the physician thinks this is very important to enter. I want the study to know about this. Maybe it's a neurologic event that's not of a high grade, but the doctor thinks, you know what, I really want the study to know about this. We want to cover our bases. We just want them to know about it. So there's a way to override their recommendation, but you can't go the other way. You can't, if they're recommending you to take action, you can't say, I really don't want to do that. And the doctor really doesn't want to do it. We don't think it's necessary. So it's like a one-way street. Once you click on that, now you're actually entering the event and all the information. And as you see in the slide, there are 10 tabs that come up. And there's quite a bit of information that goes into this. The first one is just sort of a repetition of what has already been entered. It just wants to say, yeah, this is the adverse event. And then it's going to ask you a question about yourself. It wants to know who you are, because one, you need to be have like an NCI ID. You have to be registered with the system. Not just anyone can go into this. Plus, it wants to know who to contact in case there's a problem or more information is required later. And it also wants the physician's name, and they have to be required, be part of the NCI roster. Sometimes, once in a while, like I filed a SAE and I entered the doctor's name, who's also the chair of the leukemia committee, and it didn't recognize the doctor's name. It was just like a glitch in the system. Once in a while that will happen, and I can't tell you what exactly to do. In that case, you could try again till you get it right, or you could contact someone. There's actually help numbers that you can contact, and they'll help you out if there's a glitch. Then you go to the adverse events page, which just once again reviews what you already entered. But there's also, as you can see, another button on the bottom, that yellow one, where you can add an additional adverse event or edit the one that you already entered. One unique feature of Alliance trials is on most protocols, they only allow you to enter one SAE per cycle. That's just the way it's set up. The patient might have a dozen SAEs in that cycle. So, but they will sort of want it to all be put together. So if there's a separate event, for example, a patient could be admitted for an infection, and then while they're in the hospital, they could go into AFib. That's a really, really separate event that actually occurred during the same hospitalization, or they can have a whole sundry cascade of events that are separate. So you will enter those as a separate adverse event, but it's linked, it's all linked to one main one. This to me is, oh, I guess that's the other room. This to me is the most important page in the whole report. And they actually mention this. This is where you describe the event. And this is where you want to be as thorough and yet as concise as possible, because this is where you're giving the information about what happened. And the way I do it, I usually start off with an introductory sentence saying patient so-and-so was in cycle 3, day 15, they had their treatment. The next day they reported a fever and were told to go to their ER. They went there, they were admitted. So that you just want to give, I always want to give where the patient is in the protocol, when their last treatment was, the initial toxicity that led to the event. And then I go on and give a brief description of the hospitalization course. Of course, if we're filing this within a day, we don't know that much, that's fine. You can go back and edit all of this stuff, but you want to give that sort of concise information. And the next slide gives an example of this kind of documentation. The patient presented with dizziness and orthostasis, had ongoing grade 4 neutropenia. They were pan-cultured, lactic acid of 38, which seems really, really high. But, and they were started on penicillin, and they had COVID results and pending. So it gives a whole description of what was the course. In this case, there was an update. Maybe this was entered later. Maybe this was entered a week later, or even sometimes I work with leukemia patients. Sometimes they're admitted and it's weeks before they get out of the hospital. So you can always go back and edit this. But in this case, they, I imagine the initial SAE was probably dizziness, but then they revised it because they found out that the patient was very dehydrated. That was sort of the root cause of that dizziness. And they gave them IV fluids, I imagine, and discharged. The patient was fine. So the person went back and edited this report. So once now you have the adverse event, the serious adverse event, it's in there. They know who's reporting it. They know who the doctor is. They have a description of the event. Now they want more background information to kind of fill things out. And this is where you really need to sort of dig into things a little bit. So they want the cycle the patient is on, if it's a randomized trial, what they were randomized to, then they want the start date when the patient first started the protocol, when they started the course or cycle that's affiliated with this event, and the total number of courses that the patient had. So they're just trying to figure out where the patient is at in the protocol treatment. This is, to me, one of the trickiest pages in the protocol. And it's asking for the agents that the patient was given. And so if you look, by this time, they know that the protocol, what protocol it is, they know what cycle the patient is in. And if you click on that drop-down box, it will give you all of the expected chemotherapy, investigational agents, all radiation, all of the treatment that's expected. And you have to click on each one separately. Sometimes there may only be one or two agents given during a course. On some of my leukemia studies, there are as many as 7 or 8 during one cycle. So you have to click on each one. And we're not showing this in this presentation, but when you click on one, another page is going to come up, and it's going to ask you how much of this agent they got during this cycle. So you have to know that if it was given 4 or 5 times before the event occurred, you have to add up the dose in whatever unit it is for each one and give them the total dose. And you don't want it in, the patient is getting, say, decitabine, which is given at 20 milligrams per meter squared. They don't really want that. They want you to give the actual dose in milligrams based on the patient's weight. So you have to, if you haven't done that before this report, which usually I don't, but even though I should, then you can take time out, go back into the medical record. The system will stay open and allow you time to do that. But it's best to sort of anticipate and do it in advance and go over it again and again until you fill all of this out. And then there's a special section about radiation, and that also asks you the dosage, how many fractions they got, what was the dose of each fraction. So it's good to have some of that information available. Then there's these little 2 buttons. It says save or save and continue. I usually like to push the save button first, because then it'll just save it and you're still looking at it, just to make sure it's okay. But you can push save and continue. It'll just take you to the next page. The next page is going to ask you about the subject. And this is pretty easy information to answer, except sometimes it asks you, for example, baseline performance status. Maybe this patient entered the study, like in the case of our acute lymphoblastic leukemia patients, they stay on study for 4 years. So this may have happened several years ago. So you have to go back into the notes and see what their performance status, unless you've memorized it, which if you did that, salute. But so then, and it's going to ask you all of these other questions about the patient, so they know who the patient is. And then it's going to ask you the disease name, and those are defined names. The patient has colon cancer or lung cancer. I'm just really familiar with leukemia. It'll ask you the specific type of cancer that they have. And basically it's what the protocol is treating. And it'll ask you the primary site of the disease, which for leukemia is the bone marrow, but it could be, in the lung, could be, wherever the disease is. And then it also asks you a question about metastatic disease site. If a patient has lung cancer with brain metastases, you have to indicate this. They want to know the patient's disease status at baseline when the patient started the protocol. And then it's also asking you for some pre-existing conditions that patients may have that will shed further light on the nature of the event, the certain comorbidities the patient has. The patient may have been diabetic or hypertension or having cardiac issues. All sorts of different things are really important for them to get a full view of what the event is. Then here's another section that's, it's asking you to enter the con-meds that the patient has. Now, it specifies in here, it wants you to enter any non-protocol medications that might have contributed to the event being reported. That's very important. For example, in a cardiac issue, we have a measurement of the heartbeat, QT. People might be familiar with it. And some drugs elongate it, which might lead to a cardiac event, like a cardiac arrhythmia. So if your patient, if your adverse event is a patient went into AFib and they were taking a drug that elongates their QT, it's important to know that, because that may be the cause of the SAE. But on the other hand, I wouldn't recommend entering every con-med that the patient is taking at that time. I know for my patients in leukemia, they may be on 30 or 40 different con-meds. And if they're not relevant to the event itself, you're just gonna make a lot more work for you. And also it's not gonna contribute anything to figuring out what's going on. Because once you click on a con-med, it's gonna ask you those same questions. How much are they taking? What's the dose? What's the unit of measurement? All of that sort of thing. So I would restrict it to things that are actually relevant to the event. And also it's asking you about prior therapies. Many of our trials are for newly diagnosed patients, and there's, in the drop down here, there's a choice, you could say none, but if the patient is newly diagnosed and has never been treated, you can't skip this question and not say anything. You have to enter something. If this is a relapse refractory trial, then you have to enter all of the previous therapies that the patient has had, and it will ask you questions about what they were and what kind of drugs were given. This is also a very, very important tab, other causes. If the event, in the opinion of the treating physician or PI, was not caused by any of the drugs or not caused by the disease, but was caused by something else, then, for example, just if the patient has COVID and they're hospitalized for COVID, and maybe they wind up on a ventilator, that is not caused by the disease or by the treatment. Although it possibly could be. And that's a whole other story that we could get into. But so if there's another cause, and if everything else is ruled out in terms of study drugs, con-meds, and that sort of thing, you have to write the cause in it. Now, you might not know the cause. The doctor might not know the cause, but we have to think in that moment what you possibly think is the cause of it and enter that. And that is a very, very important feature to enter into this, as you'll see in a minute. And you can enter more than one cause if you think that there is more than one. You know, when I say you, I'm saying you in collaboration with your physicians. This is another very important thing, labs, relevant labs. So for example, if a patient is admitted for thrombocytopenia, for low platelets, they're going to want to know what the value of the platelets were, and they're going to want to know both when the event started, like in the middle of the event, what they call the NADA, and when the patient recovered. And even if they didn't recover, whenever you're filing the report, it could be the next day or within 10 days, they want those labs to be entered. So when you click on this, there's a whole drop down that comes. We're not showing the slide of every possible lab. And I think there's a place where you can enter other labs that aren't in there, but really most of the very common ones. And then you have to enter the unit that the lab is mentioned in and also the value. So you have to go through the medical record and do this. And sometimes there's quite a few labs to enter. Sometimes there's just one or two that answer the question. But you just enter them one at a time. It's a little bit time consuming. And then once you're finished, you can move on to the next page. This page now actually looks back on all the information that you've entered. It lists the disease, it lists the study agent. In this case, it was only cisplatin for head and neck cancer, and radiation was given, and then it was a ComEd, aspirin was given. And in this case, all of them were deemed unrelated or unlikely related. And this is something that, physicians decide on this. And so in the case of this SAE, I imagine that the other cause was actually the cause of the event. There has to be, you have to have something that caused it. And so this is very important, the attribution to it. For example, if you have a drug that never in the investigator's brochure or in the consent, particularly the consent is supposed to list all of the risks to the patient that we know about. If a patient, for example, is on this trial, takes cisplatin and then has a stroke, we don't think of cisplatin as causing strokes, and say they have a very, very serious stroke and a very serious intracranial hemorrhage. And that raises a red flag because this drug is not supposed to cause that. And if the doctor thinks, yeah, the drug did cause it, because sometimes that is the case. And that's exactly the reason why we have this whole system. Something that really, really stands out. I don't know if people, I don't think we have any alliance trials yet with a drug called magrolimab. It's used in leukemia mostly, and the drug causes patients' hemoglobin to drop a lot in the first week of taking it. And they had some deaths on the study, and the FDA was aware of that, and they put the study on a clinical hold, which has just been lifted for a number of months, just to stop and say what's going on. And then they instituted some rules to do that. And we do that in alliance trials too. You get reports like that every so often. Such and such protocol has been put on hold, or there's a letter that goes out that we have to file with our IRB, and we have to explain to patients that there's something different that we didn't expect that's going on. So this is very important. Then you're coming to the end of this, and this is basically going back and reviewing things, and there's a sign off on it. It's called physician sign off, that if you read the fine print, that if you're a medically certified designee, you can click that little thing. The doctor themselves don't have to click it, but they have to have agreed with everything in this report. So that's why it's important to discuss all of this and not to enter any information, especially in terms of attribution, that hasn't been signed off on by the physician. But once that's done, you can click on that and then you can submit your report. What it will ask you, it'll ask you your name again and all your information, your email, because while this is going on, when a report is created, you'll immediately get an email from this system saying that a report has been created. And every step along the way, you'll get another email about this. So it'll keep you, excuse me, it'll keep you sort of in the know, and everyone else who is affiliated with the study will get such an email. So once this is all filled out, you'll go to this page and you're getting ready to submit it, and it'll give you a list of the people that are going to get the report. It'll go to the Alliance Central Office. Of course, it'll go to this CTEP system, and it'll go to the PI of the study at your institution. It'll go to the study chair, and it gives you an opportunity to enter any other email that's important. For example, you might want to send it to the treating physician who is not the PI of the study, but you want them to see this report. And once you do that, you can submit. Now, when you submit, here it says it's successful. Now, if you did something that the system doesn't like, or there's some inconsistencies, or you forgot to fill out some information, it will not let you submit at all. It's a hard block, and you'll get a whole error or more than one error. And one nice feature about the system is that it'll tell you exactly where the error is, and you can, all those tabs on the top are always there. You can go back directly to where that error message comes up and correct it, and then come back here and submit it again, and it's submitted. One last point I wanted to make about this, that's a common error. If you can read it, I don't know if people can read the bottom of the slide. It says it's submitted successfully to the group. And that means it was submitted to the Alliance. That doesn't mean it was submitted to the NCI. The end point of this process is to submit this to the NCI. What happens once it goes to the Alliance Central Office and the PI of the study, they will review it, and if they have a problem with it, you'll get another email saying there's a problem and you have to go back into the report and amend it. I've seen examples on audits where people have thought, oh, okay, I submitted it and everything's done. And in fact, the audit will say, no, you didn't submit it. You just submitted it to the group. You didn't submit it to the NCI. Once it gets submitted to the NCI, you'll get still another email saying that this report has been submitted to the NCI. Then you can kind of relax about it. That's what you wanted it to do. But even at that point, at the NCI, there are doctors there that review these reports. And if they want more information, they will ask you, and they'll send you a totally separate email, and they'll send you a totally separate address where you could scan and send the information that they want. One nice feature of this is that you can upload documents. So if the patient, their admission notice, less frequently you'll have the discharge notice, but if you do, or any other like chest x-rays, lab reports, all of that information that is backing up what you've written in here or things that weren't in there, you can upload this. You can create a PDF file, and when you click on that, you can upload those PDF files. They have to be redacted, of course, and every page also has to have the patient's study ID on it. So that's an important little detail, and most of the PDF systems allow you to do that electronically, and you can redact them electronically. So you don't have to stand there and scribble and always forget one little place, because that always happens. So this just sort of reviews the kinds of things that you can submit, and we don't have to spend much time on that. You just submit what is relevant, but you don't have to submit anything. It's not a requirement to submit. The main thing is to get the report in. You can always, if the NCI wants information later, they'll ask you for it. And then they'll review that information, they'll ask questions. And that's a common thing that happens. But if you want to be more thorough, then you could submit documents here. Me, I like to do it the shortest way possible, but that's just me, and it's better to be more thorough about it. So after the submission is done, you're not exactly done yet, because if you submitted a 24-hour report, then you will get 10,000 emails every like 5 minutes. And these emails go out to every single person in the world. And they will say that a follow-up report is due by, and I remember one night, it was like 1 o'clock in the morning, Saturday night. And I got one, I thought I had done the final report, but I guess I didn't. And then I got that email. I don't know why I was looking at my email, but I was probably watching a movie about the Alliance. But in any case, and it was due the next day, Sunday. They have no mercy. And so I had to do it right then and there. I went into the report and I had to fix, finalize it. The 10-day reports, you have 10 days, so they're expecting it to be complete. At our institution, we're required to file SAEs within 1 day, no matter, even if it says it's a 10-day report. We have our own internal SAE system, so we always report these soon. So in that case, you can go back and finalize the report. One good thing, when you get these emails, it'll always give you the ticket number of the SAE report. That's important. I always write it down in case I miss the email or I don't get it, because when you want to amend, you have the capability of amending these reports, as I've been saying over and over again. You'll go back into the CTAB air system and you'll access your reports. And I don't think anyone else has access to it. I'm not sure exactly why. And you'll see your ticket number, and there'll be all sorts of little actions that you could take. One of them is to amend the report. And if you need to amend it, you'll be allowed to enter additional information or change information, change the name of the SAE itself or the attribution as more information becomes available. So this whole business is really summed up. It's like you have to do it very quickly, and yet you don't have all the information very quickly oftentimes. And especially when patients. Oh, we have questions. All right, so I'm gonna shut up. And that's it, we're done.
Okay.
So if there's any questions, we will try to answer them.
So I have two questions mainly. The first being, you mentioned how for each cycle, the system would only want one expedited report, no matter the number of SAEs, correct?
Yes.
Let's say for the first day of the cycle, they come in and they have safety labs. Maybe they have 1 or 2 lab AEs. That gets submitted, it's already completed. And then maybe 2 weeks later, they're admitted for whatever reason. Maybe they felt like how you mentioned, maybe they have an infection, they broke an ankle, whatever it may be. Would we amend the report and include that admission into that same initial report with the lab AEs, or would that still be a completely new report? In this case, I'm guessing it would be just an amendment because they only want one per cycle. Yeah, so I don't know if people who are virtual could hear that question. It's if during a cycle you get more than one SAE, can you go back? Should you enter that separately or as part of the same report? And the answer that I don't know exactly why it is that way, but it seems like they want it to be one SAE report per cycle, but so you can go back into it and amend it or add, you saw that one tab where you could add an additional report. It's sort of part of the same thing. So yes, you can do that. Okay. And then my second being, I saw how you also mentioned that there's also, well, you can select a primary event, even though there's multiple A's. Like, let's say, again, with the first example I provided, they come in with 2 grade 3 lab A's. Would it matter which one is determined the primary? In this case, I don't think that be the case, but I'm not sure if there's a
Okay, I understand. I'm just going to repeat. The gentleman's asking if there are, a patient is admitted to the hospital and there are multiple reasons. And so we're entering, as we saw on the slides, a number of different SAEs within the same admission. I think the answer, which is the primary one? And what I usually think of as the primary one is the reason why the patient was admitted in the first place. That's just my opinion, but I think the best thing to do in that case is to talk to the physician. So for example, a patient could be admitted for a fairly, it's a serious adverse event, but it's, you know, they were dizzy. They had dizziness. And so it's not like a real big deal in a sense. While they're in the hospital, they have a stroke, or they have a massive bleed in their brain, or some other, or they have a serious cardiac event. That's way more serious than what you initially reported. Then in that case, I would think it logical that that would be the main event, and that everything would sort of come from it. But if they're generally, in most cases, most SAEs are one event. I try to so for example, if the patient has pneumonia, it's not good to enter, well, the patient had a cough, the patient had chest pain, the patient had all the different, you don't really want to enter the symptoms of the event. You want to enter the underlying event as much as possible. But you're right, sometimes there are more than one event going on. Another question there. Maybe there's some online
There are.
questions.
Can online hear me? Just to save time repeating.
Yes.
So I'm pretty new to running alliance trials, and I work in malignant heme. So there's a lot of AEs and SAEs with this
Many.
patient population. So, you know, when you have your AE form and it asks for like the date of the last date of the cycle or for the reporting, but you have something you have to report at day 14. So is it, how do you get around that? I mean, I know you have to fill out the whole form, and I guess you fill it out to that point, but then what do you do with the date of the last reporting when you never know really how long that cycle might last?
The question is being asked, I'm not sure I understand it exactly, so I'll just repeat it, that sometimes, particularly in hematologic protocols, a cycle is not a defined number of days.
Well, so to report, so this particular study, you report through metadata. So you have to have the form in metadata filled out.
Right.
And one of the components of that form, it asks you for the last day of reporting for that cycle. Or it pops up with queries to have, people
Well, I
have
see there
help.
are other people that know. Yeah, we'll bring the mic over there.
It's really a phenomenon for any SAE. We typically just put the date in that top box of the date of the SAE, and then you'll just have to go back and update the form. So go into RAVE, put in the date of the SAE, just identify, just grade whatever is going to be the SAE. The form might go all pink on you, but you don't have a choice. It'll just at least open up the box.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Emily. I'm from data management. The what we've been doing, especially for the studies that have the integrated SAE reporting, is to have the date that you are reporting entered as the reporting period end date. Fill out the AE form as much as you can, because that's going to stop that reporting on the expedited report from being able to finish its rules evaluation. And then just leave a comment at the bottom of the form, letting the data manager know that, the form needed to be completed to be able to submit the SAE within the amount of time. And then make sure that it comes back, or you come back later on to update that form and update all the fields once the patient starts their next cycle.
Thank you very much.
Couple online questions here. We'll buzz through these quick. Is there a CTCAE grading for COVID? Something that we've all been seeing a lot of.
It's under infection. It's like any other infection, it's treated.
So timeline question, to be considered hospitalization as an SAE, the timeline is greater than 23 or 24 hours.
I think it says 24 hours. It's 24 hours, a hospitalization grade. Sometimes patients go to the ER and they're discharged in 12 hours, or even very few hospitalizations are less than 24 hours. But sometimes it happens, and then it doesn't fall under that category of a hospitalization. When you look at that chart, then the patient is not considered hospitalized if it's less than 24 in terms of reporting.
So the next one is, there's some confusion. Let's expand on your previous example about someone tipping or tripping going into a camper. Say it's tripping over the dog, intoxicated, or just misstep. The patient's on the standard full Fox arm. We cannot attribute the fall to any of the treatment, and it automatically says no SAE required. But we're told that we must override and enter an SAE. The physician says it has nothing to do with the study treatment. Could you clarify? And I think, well, I don't want to say.
Go ahead.
But generally, that's in relation to reporting an AE, an adverse event. You want to, even if it doesn't seem that it's attributable to the treatment, you want to report that. And also, if it's an unexpected event, that slide that Howie showed that tells you what needs to be reported and when as an expedited report. If it's an unexpected event and it reaches a certain level, a certain grade level, and they're hospitalized, then it would be reportable, even if it's not attributable to the treatment. So you really want to look at that. But if I'm not mistaken, I think you want to report anything as an adverse event, a routine adverse event, even if it's not attributable to the treatment.
Right, that's correct. But also an SAE can be completely unrelated to any of the treatment. It doesn't actually have to do with whether it needs to be reported or not. It only has to do with the definitions of SAE that we looked at before, with the question of hospitalization and the grade of the event. And so something that, if a patient, using that example, they fall down, they break their leg, and they're hospitalized for it and they have surgery, it's totally unrelated to, I think you said Fox. It still has to be reported as a serious adverse event, even though it has nothing to do with the study treatment. That criteria attribution is just one piece of SAE reporting. And sometimes people confuse that and think, well, this wasn't related to the drug, I don't have to report it. That's not the case.
Okay. So the next question is, if a patient has a stroke while on study, and our protocol says that people with history of stroke are not eligible for the study, so does that mean that now patients needs to be taken off the study? No.
No,
No,
absolutely
sorry.
not. So when it says that, it's referring to The eligibility refers to anything that happened before the patient was registered. So if it says having had a history of stroke is an exclusion criteria, then they wouldn't be eligible. But anything that happens after they're registered does not have anything to do with eligibility. The patient has been deemed eligible, they're on the trial, and they're going to stay on the trial if they can. And it does not make them ineligible in the slightest.
Next question. Sometimes we do not have all the information and we might get the SAE submitted literally on the last day. I can see that happening a lot. That has happened and then find out that it was not submitted from the group to the NCI the same day and was automatically kicked out of the system. Is that a major for the sites?
Yes. So I would say, don't wait till you have the information. The important thing in terms of SAE reporting is to get it in. Even if you don't, sometimes patients are hospitalized at some other hospital, not your hospital. And it might take a while to figure out what's going on, or you might not hear about it for a few days because it didn't happen where you are. My philosophy and really the rules are to report the event, report what you know when you know it, as soon as possible. And you can always amend these reports later with further information, but you just want to get it in the books that we have a report. So I always try to submit when a serious adverse event occurs and it's deemed one. I always try to submit it by the next business day. And use whatever information I have and get the rest later.
Just a few more. So after submitting the CTAP errors to Alliance, it is the Alliance group submitted to the NCI, correct? The site does not. The site doesn't
That is
submit.
correct.
They don't-
There's a process and you'll get an email. It's usually pretty automatic and you submit it to the group and they'll submit it to the NCI. If they have a problem, they see a problem in the report, they'll get back to you and they'll have to correct the problem before it goes to the NCI. But yes, they submit it. You don't have to do anything.
Yeah, no second submission. And last question, is there a way to look up SAE report without the ticket number? If they weren't the person that filed it?
That I know of, I may be wrong. If you're looking up your own submissions that you reported, I think you can see a list of everything you've ever submitted. You don't need a ticket number. If you go onto the CTAP website, it'll show you everything you submitted. But to me, it's sort of a flaw in the system. I don't really understand it. It won't let you look up. It might be the protocol you're working on, but maybe you were on vacation and it won't let anybody else look it up. Or maybe you're not on the job anymore.
Hi. If it's integrated with RAVE, I believe on the expedited reporting form at the very bottom under where it says create or none or amend, it should pull in the ticket number if it's integrated and you use the link that they provide. It should.
Yes, it should. Sometimes it doesn't and sometimes it does. So that's why I always write the ticket number down. And I mean, somebody might have submitted the report and then they don't work there anymore. Or maybe they died. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to wish bad things on people, but so I think it should be a little bit more open where anyone could access any report, but that's just the way it is in that system. But overall, I think it's a really good system. It is a lot of different things, as we saw from all these slides. It's not just like filling out a simple paper form, but it does do its job. And the PIs and the NCI are aware of these important toxicities. And if there's something that's not right, then they can look at it and take appropriate action for the sake, because at your site, you only know your patients. And you might have had an event, like a pretty bad event, like a neurologic event, and think that's the only one, but maybe there's a pattern. That's really what they're looking for. Well, maybe there've been 3 or 4 of these similar events. It's not in the investigator's brochure. It's not in the consent form. What's going on with this drug? Maybe they're using it in a combination with something else. They don't really know. So this whole process, it's burdensome in a way, but it's a really opportunity to make these trials safer for patients. And that's the way I look at filing SAEs and their importance.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Howie.
Okay, oh, we went a little long. Thank you. Thank you for sticking in. This went a little long.